This is a video I've been planning to make for a while, but I never got around to doing it because I could never come to a decision on who would win. Usually in my videos, I come to some form of a conclusion in the end, but with a matchup like this, it becomes a bit harder for obvious reasons. So instead of my typical format, I'm not gonna say who definitively wins. Instead, I'll go over some ways a fight between Deku and Gojo could go, and then you guys can decide what the most logical outcome is. But of course, we'll first need to talk about the scaling. In terms of strength, it's honestly not even a contest. The peak of JJK feats come out at like mountain level, with things like Mechamaru's 1-year ultimate cannon and Kenjaku resisting the pull of a black hole. And then Gojo would be over 10 times stronger than this, given that he would be much stronger than a 15-finger Maguna, who at just 10% would likely be stronger than Kenjaku. Gojo can then double his attack power with red and multiply it many times over again with purple, so Gojo's strongest attack could realistically climb into these small country levels of power. Which makes sense given how much damage an improvised Hollow Purple did to an Island 2 Large Island level Maguna. Unfortunately for Gojo, even All Might in Chapter 1 can match that level of power while past his effective time limit for the day, and Deku in the final war has surpassed the level All Might was at in his prime. And Prime All Might, as we all know by now, is in a completely different league compared to Chapter 1 All Might, who we just established could match Gojo's strongest attack. And I mean, if you've watched any of my other Deku related videos, you would know that Deku can go way higher than this. So even if Hollow Purple was actually many times more powerful than this All Might feat, Deku would still be much stronger regardless. I guess if you want to say Gojo scales above Yuki's black hole, then sure, Gojo is large planetary, but I've talked about why I don't agree with this line of scaling before, and on top of that, it's just such a massive outlier for the verse. And for me personally, I would need at least one more feat that is even in the same ballpark as large planetary, or hell, even just baseline planetary for me to even consider this line of scaling. Speed-wise, I do think it's closer, and I can see arguments for Deku and Gojo's speeds being similar, but at the end of the day, the way I see it is, only top tiers and weakened god tiers have relativistic to light speed scaling from Cosmos EM waves. Meanwhile, even relatively high mid tiers in My Hero Academia like Chimera and Movie 3 Todoroki can dodge and move in tandem with lasers, both of which are only around as fast as 10 to 20% Deku, which is then supported later in the third movie as we also see 10 to 20% Deku dodging these lasers until he gets overwhelmed. Hayonara Sukuna, while holding back, is able to blitz a relativistic Maki, so FTL to low FTL plus honestly isn't that outrageous for full power Sukuna. And while Gojo might be a tiny bit slower than this Sukuna, he would still easily at the very least be FTL. But like I said, even high mid tiers in My Hero Academia can reach light speed, and as such, First War 100% Deku could also reach FTL to FTL+. But Deku is much faster in the final war, not just because of gear shift, but because at 45% he is equal to Shigaraki, who we know for a fact is as fast as Prime All Might, and Deku before the final war was only around as fast as a modern day All Might. Prime All Might had a top travel speed of Mach 10 according to the databooks, and before anyone says anything, this is just running speed, so it's not like it's gonna nerf the speed scaling or anything. And Kamino All Might had a running speed of around Mach 0.5, that's a 20 times speed difference. Like I said, this is running speed, but I do think it would be fair to apply the same speed difference to combat speed as well, and say that Prime All Might could fight at speeds 20 times above that of an FTL plus Kamino All Might, making Prime All Might and 45% Deku MFTL. And even if you don't want to use this multiplier specifically, Deku would still be faster than Gojo regardless, since we know All Might was much faster in his prime, even if we can't quantify it. But we already know Deku is superior in terms of stats. The real topic of this video is, could Deku get past infinity? And the short answer is no, but that doesn't mean he can't win. But before that, I want to cover some arguments for why Deku could bypass infinity and why they just don't work. First and foremost, we have Deku being able to move in a bubble of slowed time. I don't see why people bring this up because infinity doesn't slow down time. Infinity takes a finite space in front of Gojo and infinitely divides it into points. For Deku to reach Gojo, he would need to reach each individual point, which is impossible since there are an infinite amount of them. It's literally just the Achilles and Tortoise paradox made real. Deku being able to move in a space where bullets are slowed to a halt is just a speed feat, nothing else. The second and slightly less flawed argument is that gear shift makes it so Deku can't be slowed down because he ignores inertia. This is less flawed than the first one, but it's still dumb. Because infinity doesn't, really slow you down, at least not in the normal sense. Yes, Deku will be able to continue moving at top speed as he reaches Gojo, but that doesn't, negate the infinite checkpoints Deku needs to hit. And with finite speed, that just isn't something he can do. Again, Gojo doesn't slow you down, he creates more space. Finally, the third argument is that Deku could bypass infinity because he can bend the laws of physics, and as such he could punch through it. If infinity worked by solely manipulating the laws of physics, I could see this working, but infinity warps the fabric of space itself, and Deku has never been shown warping space itself. And even if he could, his fist would need to pierce through space in order to break infinity, much like how the world-cutting Slash had to dissect the fabric of space itself in order to cut Gojo. So there isn't anything in Deku's arsenal that would allow him to directly attack Gojo. But like I said, that doesn't mean he can't win, and here is where the speculating comes into play. After a character has used a domain expansion, they are put into a state where they cannot use their curse technique for a short amount of time. Gojo can refresh his technique quicker by healing his brain, however that short bit of time is still enough for Deku to get a hit in. This would be a surefire way for Deku to beat Gojo, but getting to this point is easier said than done, because Deku would first need to tank Unlimited Void, and without a domain of his own, he can't cancel out the sure hit effect. Sure, you could argue that because Deku doesn't have cursed energy, he would be unaffected just like Maki, but not only do I think Unlimited Void's information overload is different from a standard sure hit effect, I also think saying Deku would just be completely immune is boring, so I'm not gonna do that. With that established, there are a few scenarios. If Deku gets hit by Unlimited Void, he would start getting overloaded and get stunned. When this happens, One For All would shut off since it requires concentration, and that would make Deku weak enough for Gojo to beat him. But Deku isn't alone. He has 7 vestiges inside of him who have the ability to control One For All without Deku's input, and can even control Deku's movements to some extent. We of course see this during the sports festival, when they forcefully activate One For All in Deku's finger and flick it to wake him up. I'm obviously not saying that they could snap Deku out of Unlimited Void or anything like that, but theoretically, they could activate Full Cowling and keep Deku's body durable enough to tank any of Gojo's attacks. And then when Unlimited Void ends, Deku would have a short window of time to punch Gojo. However, there's also the possibility that Deku just never gets hit by a domain in the first place because of Danger Sense. If this happens, the fight would just go on until one of them runs out of energy, and since we can't say who that would be, I would count this as a stalemate. Another possibility would be that the vestiges are also affected by Unlimited Void. In this case, there are 2 possibilities. 1, Deku gets stunned and loses, or 2, something similar happens to when Sukuna was trapped in Unlimited Void, where the vestiges, much like Megumi's soul, absorb the blunt of the damage instead of Deku, allowing him to continue on during and after the domain. But being honest, I don't think this is something they could do since Deku has no knowledge on how Unlimited Void works, and as such I don't think he or the vestiges would know how to redirect the damage. But that's assuming that the vestiges would be affected in the first place, which they very well might not be. In my definitely biased opinion, I think the vestiges would be unaffected and that they would be able to protect Deku by force activating Full Cowling. But obviously for Deku to then be able to win, he would need to figure out that infinity is down. But if he can't do that, or figures it out after Gojo uses Unlimited Void for the 5th time and loses the ability to use his domain, then it's a stalemate. So to recap our scenarios here, Deku wins if 1. He allows himself to get hit by Unlimited Void, 2. The vestiges are unaffected by Unlimited Void or can redirect the damage, and 3. Deku figures out that Gojo can't use infinity for a short time after using his domain. Gojo on the other hand wins if 1. He lands Unlimited Void, the vestiges are affected by Unlimited Void and can't redirect the damage. And finally, it's a stalemate if 1. Deku never gets hit by Unlimited Void, or 2. Deku never realizes that Infinity goes down after a domain expansion. Gojo could possibly also win even if the Vestiges do force activate full cowling, but that's only if Hollow Purple is durability negation, which is kind of up in the air but still in the realm of possibility. I said I was going to leave this up to you guys, but I do want to say that in my opinion, I think the most likely outcome is a stalemate, and I think Deku winning and Gojo winning are equally less likely than a stalemate. But due to the uncertainty of how their abilities, hacks, and resistances would interact, anything could happen.